Hey, welcome to Film Fanatics, three film geeks discussing movies both new and old. My name is Dan.
My name is Justin.
And I'm Joe.
This week's show includes the latest indie blockbuster, Wes Anderson's The Grand Budapest Hotel, and the latest Schwarzenegger attempt, Sabotage. Our triple feature of older movies is new classic The Raid Redemption. My pick for old classic, the first documentary we've done for that slot, Joan Rivers, A Piece of Work, and our Oscar A to Z nominee, Aliens. We'll also take a look at the start of that series, Alien, even though unfortunately it wasn't nominated for any major Oscars. And in tribute to Sigourney Weaver's great character in those films, Ellen Ripley, our top 5 this week is our favorite Weaver performances and roles. First, though, the ever-present rumors of a Goonies sequel are back, with Richard Donner himself saying during a recent autograph signing that he is doing a sequel and that hopefully all of the original cast will be back. Now, at this time, we don't know anything more than that, and this is far from the first time sequel plans have come up, even becoming a possible musical at some point a few years ago. As for me, I will definitely believe it when I hear something more concrete, but I would certainly not mind revisiting the Goonies lore and the crew, and as long as there's a decent story that goes with it. Justin, what do you think of everything?
I'm honestly really on the fence about this one. I know last week I was all for Ghostbusters 3, but Goonies, it's pretty much like you mentioned, Dan. It's been discussed for about 6 years, and honestly, it keeps showing up and going away, showing up and going away. So, I mean, I'm all for it. I mean, the first one was great, but I'm also more or less curious where they would actually go with the new one, because Ghostbusters 3 sounded like they were going to try and keep the old cast in there, but also try and find new people to serve as, like, additional things for a kind of sort of but not really reboot, whereas the Goonies seems to want to still focus solely on the main characters.
Yeah, I mean, that's what Donner said. He'd like to get everybody back, some of whom aren't even acting anymore, so I don't know how likely of a scenario that is. Joe, what do you think?
I like the Goonies. I'm not really that big of a fan of it, but I mean, if they could bring a sequel, I think it'd be kind of cool to see these characters grown up. Maybe we get the return of the Truffle Shuffle or something.
Perhaps, yeah.
I mean, I think they're endearing characters, and it could work. But like you said, a couple of them haven't even been acting, so you got to wonder if they'd be able to give good performances, or they could recast people.
Right.
That could be controversial. And I mean, I don't know if it's like a big enough staple that it's going to make a huge buzz. I don't know. If it's not that concrete, I mean, I guess we'll see. But I mean, I'm okay with it. But I'm not really that excited about it either.
I do think it's a movie that gets exposed to each new generation. So I do think that teenagers now know what the Goonies are.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it would do fairly well at the box office. But, I mean, it would have to almost be like a Without a Paddle kind of thing.
Yeah.
Because these guys are all in their 40s probably at this point. I mean,
so.
You got Josh Brolin, Corey Feldman, Martha Plimpton, Sean Astin. I mean, those are the ones that are still in the business. But, I mean, they're all in their early to mid 40s, I guess, at this point. So
at least
it does sort of make you wonder what kind of adventure, what kind of direction are they going to do with it. And Donner himself is in his 80s, so
hey,
I mean, if it doesn't happen soon,
Eastwood still directs.
Yeah, Eastwood still directs. That's very true.
I mean, Richard Donner's a good director, and if he's still got the energy, I mean, has he been doing much? I don't really know.
Well, Justin, you mentioned his last film was 16 Blocks.
Well, that was his last directed one. He's produced a couple things here and there, like he produced X-Men Origins Wolverine.
Maybe he doesn't have the chops for it anymore, but it's one of his kind of pet projects. So
right.
I'm sure he'd enjoy doing it. But like you said, if it's going to happen, it better happen soon.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that's especially with the rumors being what they have been for the last X amount of years. It's a little
like nobody's really excited about it because
at this point it's a little repetitive, to keep bringing it up.
It's actually like Ghostbusters, except not quite as bad because it hasn't been talked about for quite as long.
Yeah, and I think really people were really jonesing for a Ghostbusters 3 with the original cast.
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm. Goonies, I think people love the original, but I don't know that.
Like I said,
people are rushing out to
the following is not Ghostbusters level.
I agree.
Here's the thing, though. Earlier, I was looking up like some of the posts on Facebook in reaction to the news.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of them are really, really excited for it, and I'm kind of surprised. I thought this was going to be a complete and utter no. Don't make this movie. This is going to be horrible. Blah blah blah.
Well, if you forget though, it's not a remake, a sequel. If it was a remake, then there would have been people burning torches.
I think people are always excited, at least on some level, when the original cast of something that is beloved gets back together.
It's that nostalgia.
Whether that end product is good or not, obviously remains to be seen with each project. But
even if it's not, you'll have that fan base that's saying we get to see these guys together in that role. Even if the movie's not that good, there's still something there for hardcore fans.
I mean, look, a few years ago, Entertainment Weekly started doing their annual reunions issue, where they take photos with the cast or some of the cast of certain shows and movies, and it became such a hit. They do it annually now. People love seeing their old favorites back together. You know, whether it's in a photo shoot for Entertainment Weekly, in a movie, in a TV reunion. I mean, you know, those used to be big.
That's true.
So, I don't know. I mean, yeah, I'm sure people are excited about the possibility of it, but is it going to translate to a good movie? I don't know. All right, well, let's move into our new releases for the week. And first up, we've got the Grand Budapest Hotel, and Justin's going to tell us about that.
Gustav H., played wonderfully by Ralph Fiennes, has been the concierge of the Grand Budapest Hotel for years, chatting up everyone and occasionally seducing elderly women who meet his standards. However, when one of his many lovers, Madame D., played by Tilda Swinton, dies and leaves Gustav with the priceless painting Boy with Apple, he and his trusted lobby boy, Zero, played by Tony Revolori, decide to take it and sell it on the black market, until Gustav himself ends up becoming a suspect in D's murder. When it comes to viewing the films of director Wes Anderson, audiences will either get his quirky, sometimes even bizarre humor, or they won't. The Grand Budapest Hotel is easily his darkest and most violent film thus far, but it nevertheless continues to hit this home, and for those who will get it, they'll definitely love the absurdity. Fiennes is absolutely hilarious as the ever-formal M. Gustav, and his interplay with Revolori only continues as the caper plot intensifies. Admittedly, one could argue whether or not the film goes a bit too far, such as one character meeting a relatively grisly fate, though it's partially off-screen. But the Grand Budapest Hotel never stops charging forward and embracing the zaniness amidst gorgeous sets and miniatures. In what has decidedly been a rough first quarter of the year, the Grand Budapest Hotel stands out among the best, and I give it an A.
Well, it's your first A of the year, so I would say not just among the best, I'd say it's your favorite, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Well, Wes Anderson is pretty much, as you mentioned, the king of the quirk. Sometimes it's a good thing, sometimes it's super overkill. Budapest, for me, definitely leaned towards the overkill. An interesting story is an interesting story. A director doesn't need to necessarily dress it up by making every shot, every set piece, and every character super quirky. And without question, Budapest has the most interesting story of 2014 thus far, like you mentioned. So I don't think it needed all of the other stuff that went with it. The characters are fun, the colors are bright, and the acting is mostly spot on, specifically from Fiennes, Jeff Goldblum, F. Murray Abraham, and newcomer Revolori. Some of the cameo performers and Anderson regulars, though, are basically sleepwalking through their roles, like Bill Murray. This film also isn't as funny as some of Anderson's other work. I don't know that the story within a story within a story was also necessary. I think 2 layers would have been fine. But, like Justin said, this has been a terrible year for movies thus far, so even though I'm not quite sure it deserves it, we have been starved for anything even remotely interesting. So for its original plot and great acting, I give Budapest an A-. Joe, what'd you think of it?
Wes Anderson brings his quirky style to life once again with awesome set pieces, costumes, and a hypnotic soundtrack, which is repeated in many different styles throughout the film, and it never gets old. It sucks you into a fairly simple story, but with a lot of complicated layers. Also, the film isn't bogged down by its large all-star cast, who mostly fit the bill with, as Dan mentioned, a couple small exceptions here or there. The 2 greatest components are the characters and the performers that bring them to life. Ralph Fiennes delivers as usual, and gives one of his best performances, in my opinion. With the inclusion of some personal favorites like Willem Dafoe and Jeff Goldblum, who share a very special scene together, Budapest is a charming, endearing comedy with smart humor and a sense of fun. It might not be for everyone, but the only issue I had with it was that I loved these characters, and I simply wanted more, and I also give it an A.
So you don't think it's too much overkill with the quirkiness?
Hey, honestly,
I mean, the story is so great. Why not let the story speak for itself?
Well, in my experience with him, the stories have always been great, but quirkiness, particularly quirky characters, is his thing. So I didn't think it was overdoing it. I thought it just added more magic to the story and gave it a really unique feel.
Okay.
If it didn't have that, it would have been still a really good movie, but it wouldn't have been quite as memorable, I think.
I see where you're coming from with the quirks, and I think in a couple spots it did go a little too far, particularly with some of the stuff that comes on in the third act. But I also feel like it fit the context of what he was trying to go for. Not quite as much as Moonrise Kingdom, which I absolutely loved from 2012, but I did think it did what it was supposed to do.
I loved Moonrise Kingdom as well, and I gave that an A. That, for me, is the peak of Wes Anderson's filmography thus far. But I think my quirkiness issue with this movie wasn't even the set design, although that was all very
Grand.
off the wall. I think it was more like the unnecessary physical attributes. Why does Saoirse Ronan need an enormous birthmark on her face? It adds nothing to her character. It doesn't get brought up. Why does Zero have to pencil in a thin mustache every morning? Never gets brought up. It's quirk for quirk's sake, and it's not necessary with so much going on. Zero is a plenty interesting character without drawing on a mustache every day. It's just weird.
To speak to that, honestly, I thought those were just little subtle details. I didn't think that they really added or took away anything. I just thought they were just part of the set.
I was going to say it was their character's thing.
It's like, you know how sometimes everybody has like their own little insignia, their own little mark. It's like that character's individual mark. It doesn't really mean anything, but it's like, that's their thing.
Yeah, like how Joe uses the phrase solid.
It's like their personal quirk, and it might just be one little thing, but that one little thing says a lot more. And I think that's just, I mean, it might be superfluous, but it's just quirkiness,
Yes, but it is quirkiness for quirkiness' sake.
Yeah, but I think
it doesn't add, like you said, it doesn't add or detract from the character, okay, but it doesn't add to the character.
It fits with the rest of the movie. The whole movie's pretty quirky.
I know, and that's my issue. I mean, you already know a Wes Anderson movie from pretty much any given frame of the movie. I don't think you need to also add, like, extra things on top of it.
Depends, though. Maybe this is somebody's first exposure to Wes Anderson. They can't say that,
And I think to them it would be super quirky overkill.
Might depend.
I mean, I think if you want to start with Wes Anderson at his less quirky, you would probably start with Rushmore, which is probably my least favorite of his films, but it's the most straightforward.
But think about what you just said, though. Your least favorite movie was his least quirky. It has less of his own soul in it.
I understand that. But for somebody that's not used to his kind of style and his quirkiness, I think showing them Moonrise Kingdom as their first entry, or Budapest, or Darjeeling Limited is not going to be... It's going to be a little jarring, and I don't think it will entice them to go see further movies.
But here's the thing,
if they're not into that.
In the case of Moonrise Kingdom, yes, there's quirkiness, but for the most part, it does stay at a relatively subtle pace. With Rushmore, the entire thing, from pretty much the first frame, is bizarre quirkiness after odd scenario after odd scenario. And after I saw that and I saw Tenenbaums, I was very, 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 very reluctant to actually have any interest in watching Moonrise Kingdom.
You are the only person, I think, that likes Wes Anderson and doesn't like Royal Tenenbaums. I've never heard anybody that likes other Wes Anderson movies. Most people, it's their favorite Wes Anderson movie.
It's still my favorite.
I mean, it's your favorite, right?
Yeah.
I've never seen it, so I can't speak to that, but...
To be fair,
the lore of Royal Tenenbaums is that it's his best movie. For me, it's Moonrise.
It's a comedy, but it's a very distinct comedy, and I don't know Justin's feelings on it specifically.
It's a decent movie. It's just I don't think it was doing what it was supposed to be doing, which was trying to be a comedy with some dramatic elements, and I don't think it gelled that well.
Okay, you know what? Maybe it's a comedy and it's a failed comedy. I kind of looked at it as I guess sort of a darker comedy, and I personally thought it was more of a drama with just quirkiness, like Ben Stiller's character and his two sons that kind of look like him. Like I thought that was like a quirky little, like kind of like the mustache. Mm-hmm. It's a quirky little signature, but that's just there. That's more of a stylistic element. Mm-hmm. The story itself was meant to be, I thought, a little more realistic because there was a lot of serious stuff going on in the movie. So I don't know. You'd have to see it, Dan, and
I really would like to.
I mean, Ben Stiller's good in it.
As a drama, it works. It's also supposed to be a comedy, and it doesn't.
Depends on what you find funny. I'll be honest. I guess I didn't know it was a comedy. Maybe that changed my perspective of it, but I still think it did well doing something, personally.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a unique perspective. I have never heard anybody say that they disliked Royal Tenenbaums. And honestly, you say that Grand Budapest is dark. I thought this one was actually, like, it had dark things happening, it had violence, but it was actually really upbeat and fun, which was, in contrast to the two other ones I've seen, was a bit different, I think.
Yeah, I didn't personally find it all that dark. I mean, some dark things happen.
But the way it was executed
it's Wes Anderson.
Fun.
This, this is expected.
Yeah.
It's by no means a bad movie. I think it's a little overkill sometimes.
And before we stop talking about it, I just want to, speak to this point. Ray Fiennes, I thought, did a great job.
He was excellent in this movie.
I think this is, one of my favorite performances ever given. Maybe his best. I really liked him.
We never really see him doing comedy.
And that's what surprised me. He's usually his drama or he's the bad guy. You never see him do something this light and fun. He's just so good at it.
Yeah, he is.
He was really good.
I honestly hope he gets a nomination for this one.
It's really funny.
He doesn't have a ton of necessarily funny lines, but his delivery sort of adds punch to everything.
Absolutely.
All right, well, let's move on now to Sabotage. Joe, we're going to hear from you first on Sabotage. It's a film. You can call it that.
It's a film.
That's about it.
I didn't think you really called it a movie.
No.
I mean, it's a film.
I mean, things happened.
Yeah.
Things. There was cameras. They were recording things, and there were people there, and stuff.
What came from that? I can't say.
Well, let's try and get into it. All right, Sabotage is, this is what they call it, an action thriller / crime drama, directed by David Ayer, written by Skip Woods, and starring Arnold Schwarzenegger. Arnold plays John Breacher Wharton, the leader of an elite team of DEA agents. During one of their raids in which one of their team members is killed, Breacher and the others attempt to steal the cartel's money and hide it. However, when they try to retrieve it, the money is gone. After their boss finds out about it, he suspends them. Only temporarily, though, as there is no real evidence. The group then reunites, though almost immediately the team members are being picked off one by one in the most gruesome deaths possible. Although the cartel are the first suspects, Breacher begins to suspect one of his own. I'm a big fan of Arnold Schwarzenegger. I've seen most of his films, and he usually picks projects that he's well suited for. With the creators of such films as End of Watch and Training Day along for the ride, films I also enjoyed a great deal, when I heard about this movie, I was actually pretty excited, as both these guys can probably attest to. I was pretty pumped up for it. Well, I can safely say that this is by far the worst movie Arnold Schwarzenegger has ever been a part of, and yes, that includes all the ones everybody makes fun of. Okay? With a muddled script, it's no wonder why all the acting is so flat here. Most of the characters are little more than stereotypes, but sadly, they're weak ones at that. Half the scenes run into each other with no sense of timing to establish themselves separately. We have no idea what's going on, or why people are motivated to do anything. And the dialogue is atrocious. It's just some of the worst I've ever heard. And what's worse than that, the twist, the twist, I'm doing quotation marks here for all the people that can't see me, okay, is very predictable. And the action is so few and far between, with most of it being ugly and rather rushed when it does come. The bulk of the movie is trying to be a mystery or a drama, but just doesn't have any real emotional punch, because it doesn't establish any of its characters or even really much of the plot. The only elements I enjoyed were some of the early SWAT missions, which actually seemed kind of true to life and semi-entertaining, and Sam Worthington, who at least seems to be trying. In summation, Sabotage, don't even bother. F.
Boy, I echo a lot of that. I mean, where do you even begin? I agree it's got to be the worst in the Schwarzenegger filmography. I haven't seen all of them, but
it is.
How could anything be worse than this?
Even the things he's done before that didn't work were kind of awesomely bad.
Mm-hmm.
The thing that really, really bugged me about this, you can tell from the way they're establishing these scenes that the actors don't know how they're supposed to act. They don't know their characters. They don't understand
the scenes. No one knows
their
characters.
Nobody knows the plot. They don't know what's going on when, and it just seems like Arnold looked like he was lost. There's one point where they're investigating in the woods, and you can tell Arnold's confused about what he's supposed to be doing. Mm-hmm. He doesn't even know who his character is. And and he's the one that we know the most about.
Right.
But even with him,
he's the only one we really know anything about.
Really? I mean, the other ones have their one or two little things, that's pretty much it. And what's even more frustrating is that when the movie's almost completely over, they have this resolution for Arnold's character, and it just made me think, well, why didn't we just watch that movie?
Right.
That's
that would
the
have been
movie.
more interesting.
That would have at least been more interesting because you could tell in that one scene, at least he knew what was going on.
Listen, I would have killed for a drawn-on mustache on any of these characters. Like, something to give them some sort of characterization.
It's the opposite of Wes Anderson.
It is. It's the opposite. It's the anti-Anderson. The characters here are all completely ridiculous. I thought Schwarzenegger's acting was just worse than ever. And there were several instances, as you guys well know, where I had to actually cover my mouth with both of my hands to try and stop myself from laughing. It didn't work.
All right.
But I tried.
You know, I was actually still trying to stick with it, but I think Dan was there. I don't know which one of us started laughing first, but there's one scene where, quite literally out of nowhere, where they suddenly decide to have a romance here, which, like everything else, has not been established at all. No chemistry at all. No subtlety, not even a previous scene or line. I don't know where.
Made no sense.
And that's when we lost it, because it was just like, what?
Well, what happened was, I was really trying to
get into it,
and like, okay,
I was interested,
give
like
it a chance.
that first scene. I was like,
and I was like, that was about the breaking point. And then when that happened, you started looking over me, and I was like, I know I can't look at him because I'm gonna just break out laughing. So I sort of like glanced at you, and then that was it. I was like, oh, okay, he is thinking the exact same thing. How horrible this is.
I think when you were thinking to yourself, you were unsure if you were the only person that didn't like this for some reason. Because, like, I don't know if you heard anything.
I was like going crazy because it was so horrible.
Because it looked like there was like all the setup for the equation should have meant at least decent movie.
Right.
It should have been at least a decent movie, like a B or something. You know, should have been. But like you're probably hoping in your mind, you were just like, okay, maybe there's just something I'm not getting here. Maybe Justin and Joe they're really into it, and then that scene comes,
and then that happened, and then
all
the two of you on either side of me started busting out after me, and then I was like, okay, we're all on the same page.
Yeah.
And then it just kept up. Like every scene after that
got worse.
I like kept having to cover my mouth because it was so ridiculous. You're absolutely right about the stereotype of the characters. They're not just stereotypes, but they're handled horribly. The decisions that people make don't make any sense. There's all these gruesome shots, which I expect were supposed to be shocking to the audience, but
they get old.
And they turn out to add just like one more layer of nonsense. Like, these are Schwarzenegger's best friends that are supposed to be like dying in gruesome ways, and he's standing there in the room, and he's just like, all right, well, that's what happens. Yeah, like, if it were all tongue-in-cheek, I could cut the movie a little slack.
But it wasn't.
But everyone involved seems to actually be like wanting to make something decent and just not knowing how to go about that at all.
The movie is supposed to be serious.
I know.
It's supposed to be really serious.
I can't. I've only given 2 Fs this year, Hercules and Vampire Academy. This one trumps them both in spades. It is an absolute F. I would expect it to be, if not at the bottom of my 2014 list, damn close.
It's pretty bad.
Justin, what do you think?
Arnold has been known for his action roles, and most of the films he's been in anymore feel like homages to those years. This would be great if that were the case in Sabotage, a film that suffers from one of the most painful genre crises of recent years. While Sabotage does have action sequences littered throughout the entire film, the main narrative is largely a brain-dead murder mystery involving a potential traitor amidst a group of supposedly elite mercenaries. Throughout the film, the movie shifts between these two genres and never really seems to be able to decide which one it honestly wants to be. And on many occasions, as I've already mentioned, it becomes unintentionally hilarious. Aside from Sabotage's blatant sexism, just about every character in the film is essentially a scumbag. It's just a gory, ugly waste of a movie that should have never been made, and I give it an F.
I'm glad it's failing at the box office, too. Like, if this were a hit, I wouldn't know what to do.
Nope, you can forget this one.
Yeah.
Skip it.
Yep. All right, up next is The Face of Love, and this is a romantic drama in which Annette Bening plays Nikki, who loses her husband, played by Ed Harris, from drowning in the first scene of the film. 5 years later, she's still trying to put the pieces of her life back together, comforted by her daughter Summer, played by Jess Weixler, and her best friend and neighbor Roger, played by Robin Williams, who also has romantic feelings for Nikki. She spots an exact look-alike of her deceased husband in a parking garage and eventually figures out he is an art teacher at a local college, and she hires him to give her private lessons. The man, Tom, also, of course, played by Ed Harris, since he is the exact look-alike, falls in love with Nikki, and the two strike up a strong romance, but all the while Nikki is keeping Tom's resemblance a secret from him, and their relationship a secret from everybody else. On the surface, The Face of Love has a strong Lifetime Movie of the Week vibe to it, but thanks to very strong performances from Benning and Harris, it manages to rise above all that. However, that's probably the best I can say about it. The characters, specifically Nikki, make all these completely illogical decisions, and Williams is entirely wasted as the neighbor, who comes off as a little more creepy than I think the filmmakers might have intended. The script is okay, and the concept is decent if you can suspend a fair amount of disbelief. But due to the great performances of the two leads, I will give it a B-. Joe, what'd you think of The Face of Love?
This film is trying to convey some very compelling ideas. The whole focus is really on the concept of true companionship and the hardship that comes from losing it. I did enjoy the look of this film as well as the score. I also felt that Ed Harris, as usual, gives a very down-to-earth and believable performance. He's a very good actor. Annette Bening also does very well as a tortured character, as she also usually does. However, the problem stems from the fact that the character writing doesn't do well for the lead. We are meant to empathize with her, and we do to an extent, but her actions are not only selfish and somewhat creepy, she crosses the line of sympathy and into stupidity at some point.
Mm-hmm.
It also really doesn't help, for me personally, as Dan also stated, that Robin Williams' character was completely wasted. Face of Love has good ideas and some honest heart behind it, but doesn't quite manage to balance the awkward storyline out with the satisfactory conclusion. It was okay, but I can't say that I wasn't somewhat intrigued. C+.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think we're kind of feeling along the same lines there with pretty much everything.
There were problems with it, but I can't say I didn't like it a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, when it was over, I was like, okay, that was all right. She was kind of weird with her choices, and
it was borderline.
Yeah,
but,
and
you know,
I like to see better of Robin Williams.
I made a comment to Justin. It was kind of irritating me.
You guys saw it together, right?
We did.
Okay.
Afterwards, I kind of commented to him, and it was something that was really annoying me. Is that I feel like Robin Williams is a great actor, and he can carry a movie. He can be a supporting character, but I feel like in most of the roles recently, like the last decade or so, it feels like he always plays a character that gets completely screwed over, and I kind of want to see him win one.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know.
Well, I feel like that's why he is on TV now with the Crazy Ones, because I feel like he probably has been feeling that too, that like all these roles that he's getting are like...
It's
losers. They're these losers or like put upon people or...
I mean, like, he's had some issues with that back in the day. Like, when after his like high point in the 90s when he was really big, people started kind of, I don't want to say typecasting him, but limiting his roles because they thought he could only do like one note or two note things. Yeah. So that's why he started doing really dark films like that I like Insomnia, One Hour Photo, like some of my favorite movies. And then he just kind of tried comedy again, and he's had a rough patch, and I feel like he did well in this. He did well in his little role.
With what he was given.
But I'm like, this character, you know, you thought it was going to go somewhere, and it still doesn't.
But she's keeping a secret of who this guy is, because she doesn't want anybody to find out that he's the exact double of her late husband. Mm-hmm. Robin Williams is the neighbor.
He should know.
And he doesn't ever see him go in or out of the house. Like, it doesn't make any sense that he wouldn't, after like a couple of months, realize who this guy is. Like, that just doesn't make any sense.
I mean, he even looks at him kind of from across the street. He doesn't see his face, but you're thinking, just by his build and likeness alone, you're thinking, okay, she's going out with somebody that looks a lot like her husband.
Well, and in the beginning of the movie, she tells him about, I saw this guy that's the doppelganger of, my husband.
Yeah, he doesn't put that together. He's a smart
right.
guy, you know.
Justin, what do you think of The Face of Love?
As I mentioned in our best of, I have no tolerance for bad writing, and The Face of Love is a prime offender. Benning's character is so dumb and ridiculous, I found myself becoming more gradually frustrated by her than being sympathetic for a situation which the movie is painfully trying to make you aware of. The general concept probably sounded good on paper, but in execution, it's bizarre, sporadic, and nonsensical. While I applaud the actors for doing their best with the awful material, notably, as you both mentioned, Robin Williams, and the end does manage to tie everything together somewhat well, which spares it from heading into F territory, but doesn't do much better than that, so I give it a D.
I don't think it's that bad.
See, I remember you said you thought it was really bad. I guess your core problem with it was you couldn't sympathize with the character.
Her character is essentially a stone cold, brain dead idiot.
I will admit she does step into stupid territory, but she has an issue. She has a problem, obviously. She can't get over her dead husband, and as crazy as the scenario is and as nutty as she seems, I can kind of see it happening. I mean, it's,
I can. Not to the horrific, nonsensical stupidity that she takes it, but...
something, I mean, maybe not like an exact double, but...
I mean, somebody who was married for, I don't know, let's say 30 years, I don't think they really say, but... and then loses her husband...
yeah.
Sees someone who is the exact twin of her husband, and you think it's crazy of her to pursue that?
She's a passionate person.
Crazy of her to not necessarily pursue that, but then to not tell him why, and then try to hide it from everyone else for basically no reason, and then come up with really, really bad lies.
That was my comment about needing to suspend your disbelief for a little bit in this movie, because look... do I think it was a good idea for her to not tell him about the resemblance? For her to lie about her ex? She plays it off like they were divorced. Turns out he's obviously dead. Did she make great decisions? Not necessarily, but look, not every movie character makes great decisions. Just because they're stupid characters doesn't necessarily mean... it's a terrible movie.
Typically, flawed characters make better characters because they're more realistic, and I believe she does actually learn a lesson at the end, which means she develops. So, in terms of
yeah, sort of.
Sort of. I mean, it's not the best development, but there is something. I mean, I've seen worse written characters. I mean, this isn't like...
I have too. It's still bad.
I know you didn't like it, and it does have problems, but I think it's one of those things you kind of have to give it the benefit of a doubt. I still feel like this movie had a lot of heart behind it. Whether it all worked or not for you, I can understand, but the performances were good enough to keep
You can't deny that
up.
Annette Bening and Ed Harris give good performances.
I mean, and I think if that's the bulk of the movie, that's pretty decent.
Yeah.
I mean, there are other issues, but...
Ron Williams gives a good performance.
Like
it's just a horribly written character, but he gives a fine performance.
Yeah, I mean, I think that their acting is so strong, their chemistry is so strong, I thought it held it up despite all the silliness, personally.
All right, well, Justin, maybe we can do better with this one. Pulling Strings is our home media moment for the week, and that's when we take a look at a movie recently released on DVD and home media.
Alejandro, played by Jaime Camil, is a mariachi singer desperately trying to get a visa for his daughter, but ultimately gets rejected by a rather distant diplomat named Rachel, played by Laura Ramsey. However, after one night of heavy partying leaves Rachel without her laptop, she runs into Alejandro again as they begin to scour the city to find it, and get closer to each other in the process. Similar to the other Spanish hit film from last year, Instructions Not Included, Pulling Strings has an all-too-familiar premise. However, what Pulling Strings has in its favor is its charm, which helps balance out the relatively predictable storyline. Though while it's easy to figure out where the story is essentially heading, there are a few moments of comedy, heart, and some necessarily to be expected romance, accompanied with pretty good music. Granted, it does become a bit too sappy by the third act and wraps up somewhat abruptly, but Pulling Strings is a lighthearted romantic comedy that does its job as escapist entertainment, and I give it a B-.
Interesting. Joe, what do you think?
This one attempts to show two conflicting points of view, not only on a personal level, but a cultural one. The main characters are rather relatable and offer, honestly, a fairly compelling story. Unfortunately, this gets bogged down by a very standard run-of-the-mill romance. Not only is the story pretty by the numbers, it just feels a bit too safe and even, as Justin pointed out, kind of melodramatic at points. But if you like traditional Mexican music, maybe you'll find it really enjoyable. It actually does have a fair sense of atmosphere that honestly does fit with the culture it's representing. And it honestly had a bit of fun and a sense of heart, as Justin also pointed out. Otherwise, though, I'd say it's okay, and I give it a C.
Yeah, Justin mentioned Instructions Not Included. This was the second of the Spanish crossover movies from last year that did fairly well here in the States. I think that this one is a little bit more accessible to American audiences, partially due to, I'm sure, half of the characters in the film speaking English, like Tom Arnold, but also because I think the story is a little bit more familiar, as you both kind of mentioned. I wouldn't say it's a completely generic story, because the addition of him being a musician and them actually playing some tunes in the film that are good make it a little bit different. But I mean, if this were turned into an American-made movie, you could easily see, Rachel McAdams or Drew Barrymore, whoever in the roles. But as such, Pulling Strings doesn't really break that much new ground, but few romantic comedies do. And this one is likable enough, though other than the two lead male actors, most of the acting is fairly weak. Although I did enjoy Alejandro's young daughter. I thought she was cute.
Yeah.
I as well give Pulling Strings a C. I mean, it's not
bad.
Not bad, but
for me,
there's nothing that breaks ground or.
I thought it was nice, but I just thought it was a little too generic for me personally. That's why.
I think if the acting were a little better.
Yeah.
I mean, he was good, and the blonde was good. Everybody else, his friend was okay. Her friend was terrible. Her mom was annoying.
What did she say?
Tom Arnold is Tom Arnold.
At the party, he didn't have much to do, though, admittedly.
Yeah, but he was in a few scenes, and he certainly didn't, add much.
Her friend did give one of the best lines in the movie when she's toasting. Toasted James Bond. I mean, that was pretty awesome. Good taste.
That wasn't bad, I guess.
It was pretty good.
I did like the music, though. The song he sings at the school for his daughter was beautiful.
Yeah, absolutely. The music was really good. It's probably the best thing about the movie, actually.
It's the one thing that made me kind of want to push it up a little bit more. By year's end, upon reflection, I may give it a C+. But all right, well, we have our top 5 now, and this is in honor of the Alien double feature that we're going to be talking about later on for the Oscar nominee A to Z. And we decided to do the top 5 Sigourney Weaver roles and performances, sort of like how we did with Philip Seymour Hoffman. We're not talking specifically about the movies. Well, I mean, we'll be talking about the movies, but we didn't rank these based on the movie themselves, but the character, the performance, the role. And we'll start with Joe. This was your idea, so let's kick it off with number 5 through 2 on the Sigourney Weaver top 5 characters.
For Sigourney Weaver, the top 5, my favorite performances. Queen Isabella from 1492, Conquest of Paradise. Best part of a rather mediocre epic, her role really brings real respect, intimidation, and honestly subtle charm, and she steals every scene she's in. Best thing about the movie.
I don't know that one.
It's okay. It was kind of a bomb.
Okay.
I remember you telling me about that.
I watched it on Netflix a little while ago, and it's not bad. It's just long, and it's kind of. I mean, I like history. It's about Christopher Columbus, obviously. I did like it, but it was kind of It's got some of the people I like Armand de Sante, and
you love him.
I mean, he's cool, and the really French-sounding name
Gerard Depardieu.
Gerard Depardieu, yes, yeah, he was all right in it. But the reason
he's usually terrible.
I thought
to be honest,
no, I thought he was okay in it. I thought he was okay in it, but really, just compared to everybody else and everything else in the movie, she's in maybe 2 scenes. She just played the character well, I thought. Number 4, Dr. Grace Augustine from Avatar. Gives a good performance as a passionate doctor, both with and without the help of CGI. When her character leaves the film, the audience truly feels it. Number 3, Ellen Mitchell from Dave.
Oh, your favorite.
Yes, of course, in this great comedy, which is, as they know, is one of my favorite movies of all time, she holds her own really well with Kevin Kline and plays both a hardened woman and a sympathetic individual with even balance. Plus, in this one, she also gets to sing.
Oh, nice.
Oh.
It's a good movie.
Yeah.
It is a good movie. It really, I think it's underrated, or maybe it's not. I feel like it's one of those ones that, once again, people bring up, and they're like, that is a good movie.
Yeah.
So, Number 2, Gwen DeMarco / Lieutenant Tawny Madison from Galaxy Quest. Also, another one of my favorite movies. She does comedy brilliantly here. I mean, she doesn't do it that often. I mean, with this and Dave, these might be the 2 major ones, and I guess more recently she's had some great performances, but just in terms of pure comedy, as I said, she's just brilliant. Once again, balancing an understandably kind of angry character, but fluidly just going into that blonde ditch just superbly. I mean, she just does both so well. And honestly, she has some of the best lines of the movie, especially towards the end. Just her smart alecky jokes about the Star Trek tropes and recurring patterns are just, for me personally, were just hilarious. And I never get tired of that movie, and she's great in it as well, along with everybody else. Tim Allen, Alan Rickman, Monk.
What a great cast.
Sam Rockwell.
Yeah. All right, Justin, your 5 through 2 on the Sigourney Weaver characters.
Number 5, the director, The Cabin in the Woods. We're going to be talking about this one next week, so I'm not going to say too much about this, and it's kind of hard to describe her character without giving spoilers, but it's just a small but really, really entertaining role. My number 4, much like Joe, Dr. Grace Augustine, Avatar. Admittedly, she starts off in the film somewhat annoying, but her growth and development over the duration of the film is great, and it really helps create the overall class conflict of the film. And honestly, it's one of those roles that just gets really, really better with repeat viewings, and even goes further with the ultimate cut that gives a little bit more of her overall backstory. My number 3, The Warden from Holes. It was a great novel when I actually read it relatively late in my public school years, and it just had a really great villain. Weaver accentuates it beautifully, particularly the manipulative nature of her character. My number 2, Ellen Ripley. It is an iconic character, and the first and second movie really portray the different sides of the same character without necessarily contradicting each other. And it's one of those characters that's just such a strong female character without being overbearing and like trying to be a cheap play towards feminists and things like that.
All right, well, my list kicks off with number 5, of course, and that is Dr. Grace Augustine from Avatar. Avatar is, I think, highly, highly overrated. Not a great movie, in my opinion, once you take away all the cool 3D effects. But she gives, by far, the best performance in the film, as she does in a lot of movies, you could say. I mean, she's a strong, strong actress. I sort of wish she was in the film longer. And maybe with those director's cuts, you get to see a little bit more. Number 4, Dana Barrett from the Ghostbusters series. This was her first foray into a more comedic type of role. Certainly, on a large scale like this. And I thought she did a great job. I mean, again, she's not in the movie a ton, but she plays a great character and pretty integral to the plot, really.
I actually like her better in the second one than the first one.
I think she probably has more to do in the second one.
Yeah.
Really. Mm-hmm. All right, number 3 is Catherine Parker from Working Girl.
Knew it.
Yep, this is really a good movie. I just saw it for the first time in making this list here, and it's one I had always heard about. I didn't quite realize how well received it was. I knew that it did very well at the box office, but it was nominated for 6 Academy Awards, including 3 in the acting categories. And this was professionally the best year for Sigourney Weaver. She was nominated not only for 2 Golden Globes, but 2 Oscars, because she had the supporting role in Working Girl and the lead role in Gorillas in the Mist, which I have not seen. But yeah, she was very good in this. It sort of set the template for a lot of her later, like, domineering, bossy kind of roles that you see in movies like The Cabin in the Woods and Paul. And a terrible movie, but Abduction. And she was in a really good movie, actually, that I know you would enjoy, Joe, because it stars David Duchovny. It's called The TV Set.
Ooh.
And it's about, I've seen it twice, actually. It's very good. But it's about him writing a pilot script for a show, and then once it gets to network, it gets changed around completely, and he has a hard time dealing with all these changes. She plays the network boss, and she's great in it. And I wanted to put it on my list, but it's not that different from her Working Girl role.
I want to see this movie now.
I'll loan it to you.
Sure, I do like it. A side note about David Duchovny, he can do more than Mulder. Like, the couple movies I've seen him do, they're really good movies.
Have you seen a movie called The Joneses?
With Demi Moore.
Yes, Demi Moore's in it. I'll loan you that, too.
Yeah, sure.
It's funny.
Yeah. That sounds like a movie version of Californication.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that, because the TV set actually came out like a year before Californication.
Okay.
And so, yeah, maybe it was some sort of template. I've never seen Californication, so I didn't know that was his thing in it.
It's the same basic plot.
Wow, that's so interesting. You should definitely see the movie then and kind of compare them.
I will.
My number 2 is, much like Joe, Gwen DeMarco from Galaxy Quest. This is a movie I caught on to way late. For some reason, it was at Redbox like 2 years ago.
It was.
And sometimes they just bring back old movies, and I thought, well, you know what? I always hear about this movie. I've never seen it.
So good.
Rented it, and it was a scream. I mean, Tim Allen is great in it. She's great in it. Like you said, the cast is just fantastic. Great satire on sci-fi shows. So yeah, just a good movie all around.
Really, it really is.
Yeah. All right. Well, much like our number 2s, I imagine we may have similar number 1s. What is your favorite of the Weaver performances?
Ellen Ripley from the Alien franchise. Probably the first truly defined female action hero, Ripley is complex, tough, and endearing, and easily one of the strongest female characters of the 80s and possibly all of cinema, and gave great performances in all the films. Admittedly stronger in the previous 2, but even the lesser ones, she's still the shining moment.
Yeah, I'll agree with that.
Oh, yeah.
All right, Justin, what's your number 1? I'm very intrigued.
Dana Barrett, Ghostbusters series.
Oh, nice.
Oh, okay.
I just thought this was a great and fun character. There's obviously some very hilariously memorable moments with her character, and I'm honestly hoping that only gets better when/if the third movie ever actually gets made.
Oh, I'd certainly love to see her in it.
I'm sure she'd do it.
No question.
Listen, even without Bill Murray, without Harold Ramis, if they do Dan Aykroyd, Ernie Hudson, Rick Moranis,
Oh, yes.
and Sigourney Weaver,
It's good enough.
I think that's a fair passing of the torch. You know, I would love to see her character come back if they do a third one. Well, my number 1 is, as well as Joe, Ellen Ripley from the Alien series. Now, admittedly, I came way late to the game on this. I saw... wait, what's the one with Winona Ryder? 3? Or Resurrection?
You saw the worst
Okay,
one.
I saw the worst one first. I saw
God.
Alien Resurrection in theaters because I was a huge Winona Ryder fan.
Classic Joss Whedon.
And it was Joss Whedon, who I didn't know at the time, but what a mistake. And so it put me off of seeing any of the other Alien movies for years and years until someone dragged me to Alien vs. Predator Requiem.
Before you continue, let me try and understand this. So your introduction to the Alien series was Alien Resurrection, which turned you off to it.
Yep.
Then someone took you to, I believe, the second AVP movie, which is
Against my will, by the way.
which is the bottom of the.
I told them literally I
barrel.
would see any other film that was showing at the time, and he insisted we go to Alien vs. Predator Requiem. So I said, okay.
Well,
I fell
Dan,
asleep twice,
Dan,
first of all.
You know how there's like that stuff at the bottom of the barrel?
Mm-hmm.
Like it's in between that and like the actual bottom of the barrel. Like it's not even really technically in the barrel.
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, it was awful. So you can imagine why
How?
I
wanna know
never, ever wanted to watch these movies. And then about 2 years ago, I decided to, you know what, let's just do it. They're apparently great movies. I must have missed the boat on it. Let's watch them. And I saw them then, and seeing them this week for the second time, well, we'll get into that later. But yeah, I mean, what a great character. What a great start to the series. If you've never seen any Alien movies, don't see Resurrection first. Or ever. Don't see AVP Requiem ever.
Alien 3 is like you can add it on. It's like an extra if you want it, but
It's a bonus feature.
basically,
Yeah, more or less.
Like, all right, like okay, do you like Pete Postlethwaite? I do.
Alien 3 is not as bad as everyone makes it out to be, but it's...
It's mediocre.
When you have Alien and Aliens, which are classics in every sense of the word, this is kind of like...
You get okay.
Yeah, you get watchable.
Right. Well, we'll talk more about the Alien series, obviously, coming up in our Oscar A to Z. But first, let's get to the first film of our triple feature. That is our new classic. And this week we watched The Raid Redemption. And Justin's going to tell us about that.
Rama, played by Iko Uwais, is a part of a SWAT team about to infiltrate the building run by drug lord Tama, played by Ray Sahatapi. Though as his team begins making their way through the building to apprehend Tama, they end up being discovered and soon have to deal with retaliation and betrayal from both sides of the law. While the synopsis makes the film seem to have minimal story, and for the most part it does, The Raid Redemption has easily some of the best fight choreography ever put together on film. These sequences flow smoothly and never cease to create excitement and help represent the current mindset of the actors involved. Are they necessarily trying to escape, or are they trying to apprehend? However, a major element of the film that factored into my grade was the presentation of the narrative. It's easy to dismiss The Raid Redemption as being all action and barely any story, but in contrast to most films bent on generating sequels, this one actually tries to fit in with the overall narrative atmosphere and their characters. Admittedly, this is a little minimal, but it's simple and, most importantly, it's effective. The Raid Redemption is one of the most exciting action thrillers of recent years that hopefully we get to talk a little bit more about with the recent release of the sequel, and I give it a B+.
The Raid Redemption is definitely not a movie I would have ever chosen to watch on my own. But a friend of mine who knows my taste in film pretty well gave it to me as a gift, and he said, even though it wasn't really my thing, you gotta watch it, check it out. And he's a big fan of like martial arts type films, so I thought, all right, well, I guess we'll see. But it honestly blew me away from everything I was expecting of it. It still isn't the type of movie I would normally like seek out, but Redemption is a fun-fueled bloodbath with absolutely great martial artists and choreography to go along with it. I do have to turn away quite a number of times when I see The Raid, though the action sequences are really about the only thing the film has going for it, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. Justin mentioned the narrative is kind of a more minimal nature, and, you know, every so often you can get a movie like this with very little dialogue or story, and it works because of how beautiful the action scenes are. At times it may come off like so many violent video games, but it's all done so wonderfully that it barely matters. I also really like how, and maybe Joe will speak to this, close to Dredd, which came out the same year, the entire film takes place in one building. I enjoyed it in Dredd, and I really enjoy it here as well. I think it's a cool concept. And just like Justin, for me, The Raid Redemption gets a B+. Joe, what'd you think?
I've heard a great deal about this one from Dredd lovers and Dredd haters. So I was very curious to see a movie I've heard mostly good things about. The movie is simple, but it knows what it is. There is a great deal of tension and honestly some of the best fights I've ever seen, including the final battle, which is a true marvel of martial arts, and for that alone, lovers of kung fu and other related flicks should definitely see The Raid. Gritty set design, stunts, and music help accentuate this even further. I only wish there had been more detail that could have been given for the protagonists as well as the antagonists, as I felt that I didn't really know or empathize too much with either group. That kind of took me out of the movie for a bit, and also due to ironically, the almost constant bombardment of action with little time to slow down and get to know the characters more. I also felt it ran on a bit too long, but maybe that was some issue with the pacing. Still, it was a well-done action flick, and I give it a B.
Not bad.
Probably lower than you guys were expecting.
It is actually a little bit lower than I thought you'd give it. I mean, it definitely has issues with a lack of character development, story. I mean, it's mostly fight after fight after fight, which seems to work for it. But yeah, I mean, if you're looking for some sort of, you know, character growth or development, you don't really get to know these characters at all, really.
A little bit, but
a little bit, but not much. I don't know if they continue this same sort of, like, nothing but action trend in the sequel, if it will work for me. Like, I feel like it's kind of a one-and-done kind of deal.
Kind of.
I think, you know, for the second one, which Justin mentioned is just now been released and is about to go into a nationwide expansion, so we may get to review it here for the show. I'm going to need to see some sort of character development, some sort of empathy for one side or the other.
Like, I'll be honest, I thought it was good, but the hype around this one, it did not meet my expectations for it at all.
Yeah, it's hard to live up to that kind of hype. I had never actually heard of it when my friend gave it to me. Mm-hmm. So that's why, you know, I didn't come into it really with any expectation other than he really liked it.
Mm-hmm.
So,
well, given that part 2's 2.5 hours long, I would hope that there's at least some degree of character development.
Oh, I would hope then, because I can't take 2.5 hours of that. I as it was, you said it ran on a little too long as it was, and it was only, 100 minutes or something?
Give or take, yeah.
Yeah, I thought it was
somewhere in that ballpark.
I think 90 would have been fine.
Mm-hmm. All right, well, moving on, we have our old classic, and it was my pick this week, and that was Joan Rivers' A Piece of Work. We had not done a documentary yet for the old classic slot, so I chose to run one of my favorites. In this documentary, we spend a year in the life, in this case, 2008 to 2009, her 75th year, with legendary comedian Joan Rivers. It was a time of change for Rivers. For many years prior, she had been doing stand-up at small nightclubs and casinos, hawking her jewelry on QVC, showed up a couple times a year to do red carpet coverage on TV, and not much else. But over the course of this documentary, she started to surge professionally with a winning turn on Celebrity Apprentice and a Comedy Central roast dedicated to her, and it all gets caught on film for A Piece of Work. She also attempts and fails during the movie to put together a one-woman show about her life. What's so riveting about the documentary is that more than 100 issues of Us Weekly showing us celebs pumping their own gas or walking their own baby stroller could ever do in their Stars They're Just Like Us section, the film shows us time and again that, no, stars really are just like us, but not because of the errands they run or that they go to Starbucks too. It's that they get insecure and scared and sad for the friends and family they've lost in their life. Rivers is unarguably one of the most successful female comics in history, but between all of her plastic surgeries and her loss of work over the years and popularity, old age is just as hard on her as it is on anyone, and the documentary doesn't even make the case that maybe it's worse because she's a celebrity, which I think was a good move. The film intersperses hilarious bits from a couple stand-up shows that year, plus the acerbic wit of her in everyday life, and there's just enough comedy to keep you laughing and see Rivers in her natural state, but it never feels forced and it never overshadows the main focus, Rivers as an interesting person. For me, it's one of the finest celeb documentaries out there, and I give Joan Rivers a piece of work, an A. Joe?
I don't know much about Joan Rivers, although I do find her stand-up mostly funny, though the majority of it came from this documentary. For me, I thought it did show some of the more difficult aspects of being a celebrity, and perhaps even more so a comedian. Rivers seems to be honest and unflinching, and that does help you to empathize with her, since her lifestyle is a bit of a personal struggle. The narrative is uplifting, and as a documentary, the format was pretty straightforward and worked well enough. If you like the woman, you'll probably love it. If you don't, at least you'll learn something new, and I give it a B.
Not bad. Justin?
Some of my favorite documentaries blur the distinction to which it is hard to tell whether or not it actually is one. In Joan Rivers, A Piece of Work, this obviously would be the comedy of the shock comedian craft and the dramatic semi-tragedy of Joan Rivers' personal life. It's hard to say if the documentary makes Rivers a necessarily likable person, but rather a human being capable of making mistakes and struggling to stay in the spotlight. That's not to say she isn't funny. She is. But the shock for shock's sake tends to be hit or miss, especially in this day and age when every comedian seems to be striving for that. In the end, Joan Rivers' A Piece of Work is an honest and interesting look into a year in the life of a very complicated celebrity, and I give it an A-.
Yeah, what I really, really liked about it is that, yes, she's hilarious. I think she's hilarious. And her stand-up, obviously, she puts it all on display. But, yeah, what I really liked that the filmmakers did, and Rivers herself, is that she allowed herself to be completely open. Mm-hmm. And, Joe, I know you don't know too much about her as a comedian or a person, but her stand-up show always does kind of rely heavily on her own personal life. She's never shied away from, talking about her plastic surgery or talking about, her relationship with her daughter or her deceased husband. So it's not super surprising that she decided to do a warts and all type of movie, but what's surprising, I think, is what gets captured from that. Because you think, okay, well, she puts it all out there every night on the stage, what more is there to see? And, you find out a lot of things that have happened in her life that are tragic, like Justin mentioned. And I think just the scenes of her trying to put together the play, she just so desperately wants to get back onto the A-list, and struggles. And even though it gets like some decent reviews, they're not good enough for her, and she cancels all that. I thought there were many aspects of this that were very interesting in the way they shot it. Justin, did you see the Mike Tyson documentary?
I did not, no.
Because that came out around the same time, and that was getting a lot of hype for similar reasons. It was supposedly a warts and all portrayal of him. And I actually gave that like a C or a C+. I didn't find it to be authentic. And I don't know whether that's because I don't find him to be an authentic person, and he was the main focus. I mean, here, Joan is interviewed a lot, but there's also other people being interviewed, that are part of her life. I felt like the Tyson documentary was largely like a one-sided show, and I really liked that here they took all aspects, and, people didn't always have positive things to say about Joan, and I think that helped it.
It's one that's not necessarily romanticizing her, nor is it necessarily trying to demonize her either.
Right.
Which I really appreciated. I wish more documentaries did that, particularly celebrity-focused ones.
Yeah. I think that is my problem with a lot of the celeb documentaries, is that they tend to portray, mostly positive, and then if there's like a bump or two in the road, it's like, this happened to them, instead of Joan Rivers, who might have been heir to the Tonight Show throne, it was her decision to leave and start her own talk show and ruin her relationship with Johnny Carson. You know, they don't portray that as, oh, Johnny Carson's a jerk.
Yeah.
You know, it was like they portrayed it the way it, I imagine, really happened. And I respected that. All right, well, good. I'm glad you guys got to see that one.
Yeah, thank you.
It's one of my faves.
It was good.
All right, well, up next we've got the Oscar nominee A to Z, and that's going to close our show. That is the Alien and Aliens double feature that we watched. The two were nominated for a total of 9 Academy Awards. The first movie nominated for 2 of those, and it won 3 technical Oscars. But what puts Aliens on the list for our Oscar A to Z, as opposed to the first film, is Sigourney Weaver's Best Actress nod. However, you can't really have a conversation about Aliens without talking about its predecessor as well. So we will be talking about both and grading both films, even though technically the second one is the one that counts for the list. So, Joe, let's hear from you about Alien and Aliens.
All right, and just in addition to that, between the two of them, they also were either nominated or won over a dozen Saturn Awards, which is the science fiction.
Oh, yes, that's true. Which I didn't realize that the Saturn Awards had been going on that long.
Yeah, when I looked that up, I was kind of surprised.
For some reason, I thought it was more like a late 80s, early 90s thing
70s,
when they made
apparently.
that. But yeah, in the 70s.
That's cool they had appreciation for it. So
yeah, it's awesome.
No, I know. Saturn Awards, I do like a lot of them, actually.
Cool.
They usually pick pretty good stuff within the genre. All right, this is going to be a long one. Alien is a 1979 science fiction horror film starring Tom Skerritt, Sigourney Weaver, Harry Dean Stanton, Ian Holm, and John Hurt. And yes, I left a couple people out, but those are the main ones that I like, and they still have careers. Sorry, guys. It was written by Dan O'Bannon and directed by Ridley Scott, Justin's favorite. The creature and related effects were designed by surrealist artist H.R. Geiger, my favorite. No, just kidding. The film follows the spaceship Nostromo. When its crew investigates a distress beacon, they find an alien ship of ancient origin. There they encounter a fearsome creature that picks off the crew one by one. I kept my synopsis very brief because I highly encourage those who are film enthusiasts to watch this one if they have not already. Also, the story is fairly simple. That is one of the aspects of Alien that makes it brilliant. The basic idea is the mysterious killer picking people off one by one, and that's been done before. Many science fiction elements are also very basic, are covered in this film as well. However, this one was all about the execution. Scott's meticulous direction helps bring great performances from a very talented cast, even the ones that don't have careers now. Though the characters don't say much about themselves, in a short time we can all really relate to them. Also, the cinematography and music create such an eerie tone to the movie which really captures the mood perfectly. Finally, the amazing effects work to help break boundaries of the man in the suit of the monster, which also was kind of a cheesy trope that was often made fun of previously in science fiction, films and TV shows, etc. But this one kind of changed the game by using meticulous detail to enhance the imposing nature of the creature. This is practical effects and puppeteering at its finest. I won't go into all the darker philosophical themes of the film or the sexual undertones, but I will say that this movie has a great deal going on. It is one of the staples of science fiction and horror, and I happily give it an A+.
Nice.
Aliens.
And then came part 2.
Aliens is a 1986 science fiction action horror film directed by James Cameron, Justin's other favorite, with Sigourney Weaver reprising her role as Ripley in this follow-up to Scott's masterpiece. It also stars Michael Biehn, everyone's favorite, Bill Paxton, and one of my personal favorites, Lance Henriksen. Ripley is awoken from a cryogenic sleep where she is interrogated by members of the Company, the evil organization who employed her. By the way, she survives, so spoilers. It turns out that a colony has been established on the planet of the previous film where the alien was discovered. After contact is lost with said colony, Ripley begrudgingly agrees to help them. Joined by a badass team of Space Marines, I think that's an appropriate term, and an android, Bishop, played by Lance Henriksen, Ripley faces her fears and wages a small war against not one, but a whole army of xenomorphs. A sequel is a tough thing to pull off. You want to make it as good as the original, and possibly surpass it, while not simply repeating the same formula, and somehow still staying true to the original film. It's a really tough thing to do. Cameron is an excellent filmmaker. He knows how to make a big-budget movie that will create a well-defined world, and give investment to the characters. He just knows what audiences want, and he knows the pulse of the times. Aliens has become a shining example of what a truly great sequel is. Not only does it parallel the ideas of the first film very well, it still feels very different and stands on its own, based on its own merits. These two movies are both very well done and also stylistically very different. So which one people like more than the other is never really the same answer. While I believe that Alien is excellent, I think Aliens is very close to that level of quality. However, Scott's vision is more aligned with my personal preferences. Also, Aliens has one of the most useless characters ever, Newt, who I'm sure Dan will probably go into more detail about. With the exception of her presence, the film is amazing, and I give it an A.
Justin, we'll go to you next.
As a critic who was born in the 90s, I have always felt robbed of the overall intent of what the two best Alien movies had at their disposal. Mystery. When the films came out, what the titular alien looked like and how it hunted was relatively unknown, and then after innumerous years of bad sequels and some video games and awful marketing, most audiences now know the majority about them well before the movie even starts. However, while that has been unfortunately ruined for me, there's still quite a bit to admire about both films. Alien and Aliens take the material in two entirely different genres, and both have become iconic for it, largely because this usually doesn't end well for any other franchise. The closed quarters tension of Alien helps give a great feeling of claustrophobic tension, while Aliens gives the audience a feeling of excitement and seeing Ripley grow as a character. That's not to say that either films don't have a few minor flaws, such as Alien taking a traditional horror route, which makes it possibly drag in a few spots, and, as Joe put it, Aliens, including the ever-annoying brat Newt, which I would talk further about, but that would most likely involve spoilers. That said, these films are truly, truly deserving of being called classics, despite those flaws, and I give them both an A.
If you had to say which one you think is better, even though they're the same grade, do you prefer the first one or the second one?
If you would have asked me that when I saw them both the first time, I would have probably said Aliens. However, much like Scott's other movies, they almost all get better on repeat viewings.
It's true.
And Alien, honestly, started out good. It's been getting better. This time around, it was like, I felt like I was watching an entirely different movie I'd never seen before, and I really, really liked it. So I would probably say Alien.
Okay. And it's funny you say that, because I would actually probably agree with that about the repeat viewings, because when I first saw them, I got all the hype around which is better, because I was like, I don't know. They're both great. However, on repeated viewing, I found there to be a clear winner between the first and the second. But it's one of the great franchise debates, which film is better, the first or the second. And like you said, everybody gives a different answer.
It's actually very similar to another debate from a similar time that fits the vein. Rocky and Terminator 2.
Oh, yes.
The ever-classic debate.
Oh, well, that's true. There's really only a handful of movies that you can say that about.
That's a good thing.
Rocky, Godfather, I guess.
Yeah.
I think Toy Story
yes.
is certainly in that debate. For me, though, the clear winner is the originator, Alien. Even if it didn't kickstart the entire series and give life to one of the greatest action heroes of all time in Ripley, it's just got a better story. Aliens is, of course, by no stretch a bad film, but where it gets easily beaten by its originator is the addition of one of the most annoying child actors and characters of all time, as both of you gentlemen mentioned, Carrie Henn as Newt, who smartly got out of the acting game after this movie and is now a teacher. I think even if they found a better actress, though, the character just is annoying. Mm-hmm. And, I get her purpose, I get her relationship with Ripley, but she just really needed to go. Technically, the original, I think, is also a little bit more ahead of its time. The goofy computers and light boards on the ship are super primitive, but as far as effects go, both movies look pretty great, and obviously they don't really hold a candle to today's standards, but if you expect them to, you're missing the point.
Absolutely.
I mean, you're not going to get the same kind of special effects, but what you do get is the story and the characters and the mystery and the intensity.
Whereas nowadays, today, it would be like, let's have the same basic idea, but everything will be CGI and the characters and story won't be anywhere near as good.
To compare either of these movies to Transformers, for example, it's like, it might technically, quote-unquote, look better
All right,
because of the
you know,
CGI.
You bring that up, but for me, I'm a diehard practical effects person. I think if it's actually there, it's more real than something that's not there.
Right.
And you can always tell when it's CGI, and that's going to automatically take you out of the movie.
Right.
If you have great effects like the Xenomorph creature or a similar film, The Thing, that's real, and sure you know it's fake. But I would get behind that before CGI in just about any scenario, and I stand by that.
Well, and listen, I mean, with Ridley Scott and James Cameron at the helm, I would expect no less. As a detractor of Avatar as I am, James Cameron created an entire world, and it is all CGI, but it still looks completely realistic. But listen, aside from the technical stuff, both have great stories, and though you could easily watch one without the other, I do think they're enjoyed best as a complement to each other. Aliens gets an A-, and Alien I would regard as one of the greatest sci-fi films ever made, and it gets a strong A+.
Nice. Very nice.
Love it.
Let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
You said one of the greatest sci-fi films of all time. It definitely is. Would you say it's one of the greatest horror films of all time?
Here's my problem with saying that.
Because it is.
I haven't seen a lot of horror pre-95, let's say.
Okay.
I've seen Poltergeist, and that's about it.
Well,
so I can't really have a good comparison for it.
That's one reason I was actually surprised you did like it, because I know that I'd think personally I watched it probably when I was too young to watch it. I thought it was a very frightening film. Mm-hmm. It
is frightening.
And I was surprised that you enjoyed it because the whole film is meant to be so disturbing on multiple levels. Mm-hmm. So I was just surprised that you liked it, because normally I'd feel like that unpleasantness might detract from your grade a little bit. I mean, like 12 Years a Slave kind of thing.
Yeah, but at the same time, 12 Years a Slave is a real thing. And I feel like I can disassociate better. Like in a horror movie like this, I can disassociate better than in like Paranormal Activity or Sinister, where it's like,
it's a little.
I don't really think that Alien could happen. Certainly not to me, because I don't go up in space. Paranormal Activity could happen because I have a house, and you know what I mean. Like,
I gotcha.
And The Conjuring is another one. Like, so it's easily a horror film as well as sci-fi.
Yeah,
but I can't really compare it to other classic horror because I haven't seen a lot of them.
Mm-hmm. But that's a fair point. It's just interesting because this film really does take a lot of those basic tropes that were used before and since, and just does something really brilliant with it.
It really does. And you said something too, Joe, that I thought was really interesting. That we don't spend a lot of time with the characters up front, yet we kind of know who they all are, and we empathize with them almost immediately.
Because they're supposed to be, they're not the hero, they're not the Flash Gordon, they're not the Captain Kirks or Luke Skywalkers even of the time. These are normal, working people. They have a couple conversations, we get a couple scenes with them, and the actors just do a subtle job with it, and we can identify and get in their shoes, even though, honestly, I don't really know any of their names.
No, I don't either.
I know Ash,
Kane,
and I don't know. I don't remember their names, but I know these people.
Well, and to be honest, that may be something that Alfonso Cuarón sort of adapted with Gravity. Because Sandra Bullock isn't an astronaut, she's a scientist who just happened to be going up to space to help them, So it is that kind of like everyday type person that is more easily related to and to sympathize with. So I think you hit on a good point there. Well, it's good to end with not one but two great movies for once in our Alien double feature. Yeah, I highly recommend both if you haven't seen either. And don't do it like me and do them out of order. Watch the first and then the second.
And stay away from
Alien. And then decide for yourself how much time you have to kill. All right, well, that's going to do it for the show this week. Joe, what's going on with your YouTube channel?
Oh, I finally got that top 10 arch enemies list up that I did with my one friend. Cool. So that was pretty cool, and I've just been I did Captain America review.
Oh,
so
nice.
If you guys want to get...
which we'll be talking about here on the show next week.
I did it with a bunch of my friends, so I didn't get to voice my opinions quite as much as I would have liked to.
Was that another in the car review?
Another car. This time.
I love those.
And you watched them.
Oh, yeah.
They're very entertaining.
Yeah.
Not the most organized, but
No.
if you haven't watched
But
it
they're
yet,
fun.
You didn't see this one?
I haven't seen because I haven't seen the movie yet. So
Oh, that's right. Well,
Yeah.
well, afterwards, just you can watch it a bit. It's a fairly long video, but it's like I actually used the van, so I saw it with about 9 of my friends.
Nice.
And I crammed 7 of them in there to all voice their
That's
opinion.
awesome.
So
And you can link to all your videos and your page really at the bottom or in the description of this video. And you guys doing another There Goes Tokyo for the Godzilla ramp up here?
yeah, there'll be another one coming up pretty soon.
Okay, very cool. And you can check out our 5-word reviews weekly. Usually we post them about a day or two in advance of the new episode on our Facebook group. That's Film Fanatics with an exclamation point. And the Twitter feed will also tell you when our new episodes are up, and that is at Film Fanatics Pod. And that's going to do it for this week. We'll see you back here next week. Bye!